Welcome to Executive Access, created for motivated professionals. This is your home for real talk with executives about their career journeys, leadership practices, successes, and learnings along the way. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, we're talking to former Microsoft Corporate Vice President, Dave Willis. Dave is well known in the industry for being a phenomenal people leader and for being a leader that drives consistent, strong business results. Dave speaks to us today about how he does both of those things, including the importance of focusing on impact. Dave also talks about mindset, both his mindset and the mindset of those he looks for around him. Dave was the most impactful leader in my own professional career journey, and I'm so excited for you to experience learning as well for yours. Dave and I talk about a few frameworks, and we'll link to them in the show notes. Let's dive in. Welcome, Dave Willis, to the Executive Access podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, Jamie, it's great to be here. And when you asked me to join you here, I jumped at the opportunity because you are definitely one of the most impressive executives that I worked with at Microsoft. So pleased to be part of it today.
Thanks so much, Dave. You are my inaugural guest. I literally said we have to build the entire timeline around your availability because you've been such a special part of my growth in my career, such a great leader, such a great mentor. And we'll get into some of that in a little bit. But a little bit about you for those listeners that don't know about you. You had a nearly 30-year incredible, epic career at Microsoft, and you just grew so rapidly through your career to many different roles. You had tons of different responsibilities. Your last 8 years, you were a corporate vice president across multiple businesses. So I have a lot of questions about how you navigated your career a little later on. Today, you're a board member, I believe, of 4 companies, and you advise startups. You work with PE firms, so you're keeping yourself quite busy in the consulting space.
I'm definitely not retired, Jamie. I'm definitely not retired.
I could never see that about you. When I think about you, I think competitive, like always on the go. In fact, little fun fact, you are an avid snowboarder and hockey player. Are you still doing those things, snowboarding and hockey?
That's right. Yeah, I got in the mountain snowboarding quite a bit this winter. And yeah, I still play hockey when I can. In fact, I played in a tournament down in Nashville just last month. So it's keeping me busy. And yeah, and we're traveling a lot. My wife and I are traveling a lot around the world as well, which, I got to do a little bit before, but I have a lot more time now to experience other things like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, you sent me a picture from Italy, was it? Just gorgeous, of course you put some activity in that too, right? It was like biking and good food, kind of mixing those two. Very impressive. Well, I figured I would ask my growth mindset question because I know you're always continuing to learn and grow. What else besides the long-term hockey passion, either work-wise or personally, what are you focusing on growing these days?
Yeah, well, I'm having a lot of fun on the boards, and they really asked me to join because of my Microsoft, my domain knowledge of the business. But I'm really learning a lot about the finance element of the board work. So, things like cap tables and shareholder composition and financing structures, strategies for raising capital, just a lot of things like that have to do with the finance element of running a business. And so, I'm kind of a bit of a rookie when it comes to that relative to, most of the finance guys that are on these boards. So finance people. So anyways, I'm learning a lot and it's a lot of fun to learn about that.
Oh, that's great. My first board that I joined, there were a bunch of venture capital experts on the board. And they were talking about, like we need to think about the magic number. And I'm like nodding my head. Meanwhile, I'm looking to decide what the heck's a magic number. So lots of learning, at least for me, so I can kind of get where you're going on that. Fantastic. I was reflecting earlier on how we met. I thought that could be a fun story to share. So I met you because all of a sudden it was announced that there was this new leader coming to the US from Canada. He was going to be my boss. That's all I knew. His name's Dave. But at that time, I think I was like 8 months pregnant. And the first time we met, our first one-on-one, I was so nervous to speak to you because I was going to have to tell you at some point in this conversation that in about 3 weeks, I'm leaving for 3 months. And I just felt the weight and so stressed out about that. And I'll never forget your response. You were like, only 3 months? Okay, great. Well, I think that sounds wonderful. And I'll look forward to seeing when you get back. And I thought, Oh my gosh, that was just amazing. I don't know if you remember that, but that really stuck out to me.
You
Really
know,
stuck out.
I do remember that. I remember meeting you, and I remember that one-on-one. And you know, I would say, you know, there's a lot of similarities when it comes to business between Canada and the US, more similarities than not. But parental leave is something that's different, where it's a lot bigger in Canada, where, you know, it's rare for a woman not to take a full year off, quite honestly. And so when you said only 3 months, I thought that that was a deal. But yeah, you know, coming to the US though, you know, from Canada, and it was a large organization, right? It was the entire East region, and you know, I had to assess the quality of people that I had never met, you know, fairly quickly. And I got to say, you know, I recognize your talent level right away. I would say, you know, I've got a lot of development areas and still do, but one of my strengths, I think, is identifying key talent. And, you know, I saw that in you, because you weren't even a direct report of mine at the time too. I think you were working for one of the GMs.
Yeah, that could be.
But yeah, I saw your intelligence. I saw, you know, how curious you were, your passion. And, you know, there's something that I look for in people that I call commitment to excellence, where, you know, when the going gets tough, your willingness to do what it takes and figure out, you know, despite the level of difficulty. And I saw that in you, and even that first one-on-one. So that was really, that's why I think I remember it, is I remember seeing the talent in Jamie Tazi, and it sure played out that way too, which is great.
Ah, thank you. Well, you're a great judge of talent, I just have to say. No, I'm just teasing. Well, you know, that actually brings me, when I think about you, um, there's two, I mean, there's so many amazing things, but two big things come to mind. And not many people can put those together. One is driving consistent results. So we're all about the achievement side. You know, we're here in a business to achieve results. But then the second is around people leadership. And you had this brand, certainly with me and broadly at Microsoft, as being able to balance those two. So let's start with the people leadership side, since we're kind of naturally going in that direction. I saw you as, you know, there's this model that Harvard Business School does that I love. Like the x-axis is warmth, high and low, and the y-axis, y is warmth, and competence is the x-axis. You know, sort of high and low. And there's not too many leaders that I've experienced, or even that I coach, that are in that upper right quadrant, where they can somehow master warmth and competence at the same time in terms of how they project. And that is certainly you. And how I experienced you early in my career, it was, you know, I sort of lacked confidence, and you were encouraging, yet you still set a high bar. Later in my career, when I had more confidence, you know, it was more like, I want to do a great job for Dave because I can't let him down, right? Because you'll call me on it. You know, you'll call me on it, but you're still encouraging. So I'm just so curious about what you were saying earlier. What specifically do you do, and how do you think about people leadership, that might answer my question, which is ultimately how you show up? Because in that is, I think, some masterful wisdom.
Sounds good. There's a lot in there. Where should I start? I guess first off, you know, to your point around just, you know, the accomplishments. I mean, yeah, I take a lot of pride in what we're able to do. You know, you mentioned brand. I never, and I know that's important and it works well for some people. So I'm not saying it's not good, because I've seen it work for people. I just honestly just focus on what I thought was right. And I think ultimately that ended up being my brand, but I never, you know, kind of crafted, this is the brand I want to be. I just thought, I want to do what's right. And I want to, you know, I want to have an impact. And so that's kind of where I focus. And I think that's ultimately probably how my brand, you know, came across. But I think, as you know, I was and still am a big proponent of impact over activities. And so I was still I'm laser focused on goals, you know, measuring, you know, progress and success, you know, so critical. I think you probably remember my line: if you're not keeping score, you're only practicing. Ephraim used
Absolutely.
to, from String, the late and great Ephraim Stringfellow used to remind me of that line. But you know, I think it's important to keep score like that. But you're right. There's the people side and the business side, and they're interrelated, but distinct and unique as well. And on the people side, you know, obviously getting the right people in the right roles is so important. I would say, you know, hiring is such critical element for a successful leader to get the right people in place, because, you know, as I mentioned with you, you know, people who are committed to excellence will push themselves much harder than I could ever push them. And so, that people side is key, and really, understanding your people, knowing their needs, wants, and aspirations, and managing them in a situational way, because every person is different, and every person needs, different, I guess, support and help. But that's so important. And then, of course, the business side, and you might, laugh or smile when I say, I always focus on creating what I call operating models. And I think this is true for any business, this concept of operating model where, start with, and particularly from a sales and marketing standpoint, start with an understanding the customer, break down the business into discrete components, because a complex business can seem overwhelming, but if you break it down into the parts, it makes a lot more sense. Determine the key performance indicators, on each of those elements, obviously aligning the roles and the people to the model, and then looking where the intersections and the connections is so important, because that's usually critical to success too. Making sure the tools are in place, and then measuring and reviewing progress frequently, and that's how you can learn and refine the model over time, because you're not going to get it right out of the get-go. But if you take that approach with this kind of continuous learning, growth mindset kind of thinking, of course celebrating successes along the way is important too. But I think we first did that when we worked together in the Dynamics business, where we had 13 straight quarters of achieving plan, I think, on a business that was really, really challenging. And so using that approach, I think we had a great team. That evolved too, right? I mean, we did have to, fill some key roles with some key people. But then we created this operating model approach and really refined and got it better over time. And I think that's ultimately, what led to our success. But beyond that too, though, I would say there's just this mindset, because it's not all X's and O's, right? There's a mindset I think you need to bring to the table, and I've touched on this a little bit already, but the three things that jump out at me that I always put a focus on is, first off, being curious. So applying that growth mindset, learning and adapting. Applying critical thinking. Not enough people do this. I think they kind of stay at the surface level, but it's so important, to peel back the layers. And as you knew, when we worked together in that Dynamics business, there were some tough challenges that we were able to get through. And it's just by, getting the root cause of a problem or an opportunity and dealing with it at that level, I think was so important. And you're just asking a lot of questions. So being curious, being courageous. And this is one area which I think I had to learn and get better at over time. Meaning, stepping outside your comfort zone in order to raise your game. I don't think that came naturally to me at first. I was more reserved, I think, when I started in business. Taking calculated risks. I mean, when we stepped in that dynamic, it was probably one of the toughest businesses at Microsoft, right? And you and I both took a risk to be in that business, but it sure turned out for us overall. And then the third is around perseverance, just keeping at it, despite the challenges. If you stick at it, you'll get to kind of line of sight to success, and that's ultimately where you want to be. And so those are some of the, I think, learnings and just approaches that I took in running businesses at Microsoft.
Executive Access is brought to you by The Ideal Life. The Ideal Life offers a multimedia platform that is focused on cultivating a growth mindset. Here you'll find a supportive community, valuable content, and transformative coaching aimed at helping you live a more gratifying and joyful life. Ready to take the next step in your personal growth journey? Visit theideallife.com to explore their wealth of resources and join their vibrant, growing community today. Amazing. Well, I'd love to drill down on some of them. So you mentioned, when you first meet somebody, or when you first met me, you kind of assessed and you could see that you were looking for qualities more than anything, the curiosity and the commitment to excellence. How do you do that? How do you, in a 1 hour, 45-minute conversation, assess that?
Well, it's definitely listening. It's not talking for sure. So, I think you probably know, my leadership style. I asked a lot more questions than I did,
Yes.
right? And maybe it came naturally to me. I don't know, but I think I got better at it. I think I got better at watching other leaders in action do it. And so, because what I found is people learn better when they say it themselves as opposed to having to tell them about it. And when they say it, they kind of, feel they own it as well. But I would use, Microsoft has this term we call precision questioning too, which is where you kind of start at a high level, kind of general questions, and then you drill down into specific questions, looking for specific answers. And that's usually where, the truth comes out in terms of, the talent of the individual I'm talking to, their level of, thinking, their level of ownership, of the business, that sort of thing. And because I think that's kind of what you can determine through the questions. Do they know their business? Do they really feel like they own it? And are they really committed to it based on their level of thinking? And I tell you, that's questioning can get to that pretty quickly. And so that's I think the level of, that's probably what I used when we first met. And I think you saw it a lot in business.
I didn't even know you were doing it to me. It felt good. I was just worried about whether you were going to be upset about me, going on a leave. But come to think of it, I do remember this is how I experienced it. Like if we were in a business review or something, I think it was pretty rare that I felt it. Probably because I'm pretty tough on myself. Before you would dig in, I would probably be there myself. But I would see it in others. You would ask a question, and then all of a sudden you would get another question, maybe a little bit more specific. And then there was an answer, and then a third question, and a fourth. By the third or fourth question, I'm thinking about my peer or another person. I'm like, oh boy, he's not liking what he's hearing. But that is such a skill, and I think it's something that I really observed about you. And I think it wasn't to make another person feel bad, but it was just to get down into that root cause you were talking about. Is that right? Like to really figure out what it is that we need to fix or get right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I hope you saw, like those business reviews, we might have, who knows, 10 or 20 people, right? In a room and on the and everything else. And so the last thing, if I saw someone is exposed that I thought they didn't know their business, they weren't really on their business, it was really rare for me to call them out in any, aggressive way directly, right? And because they may not be working for me either. And so, but I would definitely take the time to talk to their manager after and say, hey, it didn't sound right, and sometimes I might have misinterpreted too. I'm not always right, obviously. But it would give me some flags that we follow up on later to help that individual out.
But I think absolutely. I never saw you bashing somebody or making somebody feel bad. But I think by people coming in and knowing that you were going to go to that depth, you were that curious to understand what was really going on. It wasn't necessarily a test of that leader's capabilities, although you were assessing that too. Because people knew that you were going to go deep and really try to learn, they had to bring their A game. And I think there's a leadership lesson in that, which is how do you get the best out of your team? There were times when I said, okay, I have a one-on-one with Dave tomorrow, or I have a business review. I really need to make sure that I'm tight on my numbers, that I understand what's going on. And it's in that preparation and in that process where the learning occurs, right? And so having to know that I needed to step up was something that I took from you, because I think if you're looking for outcomes of driving results, that is how I connect to your leadership. Do I have that right?
Yes, no,
It
absolutely.
probably came naturally to you, but I studied it. I studied you.
That's cool. Yeah, no, we had some great times there for sure.
Absolutely. Impact over activities. Can you talk about that? What you mean by that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just find that oftentimes people would focus on doing as much activity as they can, and we're proud of the list of all the things that they did. But if you're not measuring or thinking about the impact of those activities, then who knows if you're actually moving things forward. And oftentimes people can get stressed out because they're just working too hard because they're doing too much. And how do you prioritize? Because at the end of the day, we're constantly, it's one of the hardest things I think in any job, right, in particular Microsoft, is to prioritize your activity. And how do you prioritize if you don't know what's having an impact and what's not? And so, I was probably, overboard on the measurement side of things. But I really do think it's important to do. And again, you can't just focus on that. There's all the other qualities that I talk about that are important too. But, if you can't measure something, then you got to wonder, is it really worth doing? And part of that, I mean, I think that was the culture of Microsoft. I think kind of starts at the top, right? but I do think that's super important. And again, I think it can be the cause of stress when people are just doing too much and they don't realize they need to cut back. Sometimes less is more, right? Focus on the really high impact activities, not trying to do it all, I think is kind of what we need to do.
Absolutely. And, this idea of perseverance, um, you definitely have a lot of perseverance because, I mean, 13 straight quarters of blowing out results in a business um, is not the norm. You usually have a blip here and there. But like on a personal level, where does your perseverance come from? And, how has that maybe translated into the workplace?
Definitely competitive nature. I mean, growing up, I was always a competitive, sports person, lots of different sports. So I know that is at my core. In fact, I know that was the driving force behind, my work at Microsoft too, is just that competitive nature. There's a bit of a fear of failure there too, for sure.
Mhm.
Which kind of they go a little bit hand in hand, I think. Um, but yeah, winning's sure a whole lot more fun than losing. For sure.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I got the most motivation, kind of like, celebrating that hockey tournament I talked about. We won that hockey tournament, interesting enough. And it was just so much fun to celebrate with the team, right? And that's where you get so much joy. And so similarly, like remember with some of those, meetings where we're celebrating successes and stuff. I mean, I got so much fulfillment from that I think it was a big driving force, to persevere, through all the big challenges. Plus, I think particularly over time, I got more motivated by the tough challenges. So like to be given something that was really challenging and to dig in with people and again peel back the layers because that's usually why the challenges remain is people aren't going deep enough to really understand what's going on. And so really going deep to the core and then coming up with some plans with people and then executing and delivering the results is nothing better than that.
I remember just this funny story just popped in my head as you were talking. I remember I must have been kind of on vacation because I remember I was at a beach house when this happened, but something bad had happened. I don't even remember the bad. That's probably good. Something like I had done not a great job in a meeting or some business result of mine wasn't really good. And I remember calling you and being like, all right, Dave, this is what we have to do about it, blah, 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 saying something. And you paused and you actually said to me, Jamie, you're like one of those beanbag things that you like punch, like the punching bag things that like comes back down and like pops back up. Do you know what I mean? Like there's things that have like the sand in it. You're just like, I can just like, you just like come right back up all the time. It was like the best compliment I ever had. Cause I'm like, well, at least he's not done with me yet. I made a huge mistake, but he's not done with me. But I do think about
True, and you would always, but a lot of people would you really get them down, but you pop up with a smile on your face and just a
yeah.
positive, optimistic demeanor, and it was really impressive.
But here's what I would love my listeners to understand and what you're talking about too is, there was probably something in me that I'm wired that way, but more so it was the encouragement of you as a leader to encourage me to say, not say, it's okay, Jamie, no problem. You didn't say that. You said, hey, you missed the bar because I set the bar here and you missed it. But you know what? Like you're going to get there, no problem. You didn't cut my legs out from under me. And I think you somehow knew early in career what I needed in terms of encouragement. And I think that is a takeaway that I would love the listeners to really take away. If you're a leader, is to really think about if you're dialing up the encouragement on somebody, even if they make a mistake, man, they can do great things. A woman that I worked with named Vanessa, when I was leaving Microsoft, she said to me, Jamie, don't ever underestimate what a word of encouragement can do. And so it really hit me. So I thank you for that. But I think that's the lesson around people leadership that you do so well.
I agree with you too. And you talked about that model, I think you said warmth and competence.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's another model that I learned, which was connection and conviction.
Mm.
Connection being, really, connect in with your people, understanding, what makes them tick, their needs and wants and everything, desires and aspirations, and supporting them. And then conviction being, driving hard in the business, very results oriented, and everything else. And I always aspired to be that upper right, highly connecting to people, but also driving the business in a strong way. But at the same time, to your point, is you got to move around in those boxes, right? Because there's times where you have a high performer who didn't deliver something, and they're feel beaten up or beaten down, like you gave in your example. And there's a time where you support them and pick them up off the mat. You don't drill them harder on the conviction scale, right? You really pull back on the connection side, even though the results aren't there. And that is so important, I think, as a leader, to really be in tune with your people on where to be at what point in time. And a lot of leaders don't do that very well, I don't think. But I know I aspire to be as strong as I could on those dimensions.
I am literally picturing an XY axis because that's how my brain works, and seeing you dancing across it, because that makes the most sense to me. We had, you were, at one point, I was a direct report of yours, and we had a bunch of other leaders on the team who were they were more advanced in their careers than I was. They just happened to be on the same leadership team. And I saw the way that you interacted with them was different, maybe a little different than, the same way you interacted with me later in career. And I think having that situational awareness, which goes back to your point about really understanding your people and where they are and what's going to get the best out of them. So, um,
Yeah,
uh,
at the same time, I was big on empowerment, right? Like, because I saw, great leaders like if I fully empower you, you're going to deliver better than I can ever deliver. And on the competence scale, you got so many different, you're able to do so many things that I can't do. So I just know, I could count on you. But sometimes people don't deliver, right? Sometimes they might even let you down. And I always found when this happens, just need to, as a leader, you need to roll up your sleeves, get in the weeds with your people, help them figure it out. Give them the opportunity to course correct. And usually I find they make it through. If they don't, it's because they're probably, not in the right role, or maybe they need to move on to something else. But generally I found, leaders would deliver better than expected when I empower them. And it's sure a whole lot easier as a leader when you can get great people and empower them and deliver results. That's kind of the perfect scenario, right?
sometimes they surprise you, right? Like in a good way. You let them, and you're just like, wow, that was better than I could have imagined. We're having this amazing strategic conversation, but can I ask you something tactical? Because I'm dying to know the answer to this question. And I want my listeners to walk away with some practical things. The thing about you is if you ask me to do something, it could be some small thing, right? And I said, yep, I'm going to do that. I like to think that most of the time I just did it, but there were a couple times I would get an email from you like a week or two later. Hey, Jamie, just checking in on this thing. I'd be like, duh, it was like the worst feeling because I'm like, hey, I let Dave down. Like, you have a million things going on as a senior leader. How did you track that? Like, is there some special tracking like, did you track what you asked people to do to follow up, or do you just have like a memory of steel around that? Because it goes to driving a culture of accountability, just a gentle little nudge, like asking people to actually do what you say. Asking people
No,
to actually do
yeah,
what you
no,
say.
I mean, as you knew, I was running some, that SMS, it was an $8 billion business I was running with, whatever, 550 people or something, or no, 1,500 people, I think it was. So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't manage at that level, but there were specific things that were important to me. And so and I'd remember some of them. And so that's probably what it was, is just there was a handful of things that I knew I really want to make progress on for whatever reason. And so I'd follow up on them. I don't, the part probably in the back of my head, I was thinking, hey, it's a bit of a test too. If I, ask about this, they'll make sure that next time, they take action items, that they're following up on them. So there's probably a little bit of that too. I'm not sure I consciously thought about that, but probably subconsciously I did, as a coaching mechanism. But no, you're right. There were some things that were really important to me that I would track down and follow up on for sure.
I think that may be one piece of your secret sauce around delivering consistent results is, really whatever you expected that you were getting that back. And I had this thing with my team because I love to ideate and want to like talk about a million things. We're going to come up with a million ideas. And I had this amazing guy. His name is also Dave Armboli on my team. And he would be the one to say, okay, but great. What are we actually going to do? And I'm like, thank you for bringing us back. So we had this thing to say, okay, what do we just decide to do at the end of every meeting? And we would be really clear. And when I found that I followed up and actually asked people about it, I learned that people are going to focus on what you ask them to do. And so you can't just agree to something. And I felt like you did that so well. So I was just curious about that. So you didn't even know you did it. It just comes naturally to you. but it didn't come naturally to me.
Generally, yeah, people want to, want to make, make their manager happy, right? It does, makes life easy for sure. Disappointing your boss is never a good feeling for sure. So yeah, so that's important to do. And it's important, to run the ship in a well, effective and efficient way that people are taking their actions and following up on them.
I want to shift back to what you were saying about the operating model focus. You taught me that, and I literally have taken it everywhere I go, even beyond Microsoft, and bring it to my clients to say it's not about the thing, it's about everybody organizing around the one thing. And that whether you're sales or marketing or product or partner or whatever business area, that everybody understands where they fit in. So I think that is really powerful. So I think of that as like a systems thinking, right? Being able to see things and how did you come up with that? Like, was that something that you always had and brought to the business, or was that something that you brought to the business as you became a more senior leader and had to kind of look across more effectively?
I think it first started when I was an individual contributor I was
Mm.
a salesperson, and there's so many different things I needed to do. And so I came up with kind of a list of all the things you need to do and kind of organize it that way. But that was in a very simplistic form. But it was really when I first was responsible for a large customer segment that was not enterprise. It was not a one-to-one selling. It was a scaled selling motion with partners. And to do that, there's just so many different moving parts and different roles within the company and outside the company. And unless you were clear on exactly what those processes were, how you aligned the people to it, how you measured success, how you tracked that, and then measured and refined it, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know how you can run a business without that's kind of system approach in place. So I kind of learned it early on, and it served me well in my career too, because most of the jobs that I had in the latter part of my career were all kind of complex scaled business ownership. And so and there were so many leaders in Microsoft were kind of enterprise focused. They're really good at going into a large account and selling and delivering value to those clients, and that's great. And it's important skill set and important element of the business. But I kind of got jazzed by the complexity of figuring it all out and putting a model around it and executing with people and then celebrating success. That's kind of what drove my career, and definitely in the latter half, I would say.
I wonder if there's the element of your hockey team background too, because it really does bring people together as a team. When you can say, I'm not just focused on marketing. I had this saying, you're looking left and right and saying, okay, well, how does my marketing impact what you're trying to sell? How I'm developing the product match to what the customer is saying to the salesperson? And how are we connecting the dots on all that? So it does
That was
create an
interesting. You
environment.
brought up the hockey analogy, so I'm jumping on
Yeah.
that one. You're right. I mean, a lot of people watch hockey and they think it's just a bunch of skaters going around, skating as hard as they can, passing the puck and shooting and everything else. But breaking out of your own end, like teams have a specific approach on how they do that. And it's so much more effective when everybody knows where they're going to be and where you expect to be, where the puck's going to go and everything else. And it's kind of 101, but it just helps a lot, and it ultimately delivers the results you're looking for.
I spent most of my career in more incubation businesses. So, Dynamics early on. You were in Dynamics for a long time and then broke out into the bigger businesses. But I think, especially when you are more in a scarcity model where you're like, we have really limited resources and we have to like get everybody aligned to do the right thing, whether it's on the hockey rink. I almost said field, sorry, hockey rink. That's another thing. Didn't I always mix sports analogies when we worked together?
I remember this example. Yeah, we wanted a really strong close with CRM online because it also said, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? If once you sell, it's a recurring business. And in Q4, and you came up with a program called Spike the Ball. And we're like, no, Jamie, you spike the ball after you score. You don't create a program called Spike the Ball. I think that's what you're talking about. I still remember spiking the ball program, but you know what? It worked. I remember you
But I
delivered on.
recovered. I recovered, right? Because I said, well, I'm just going to call that we're going to win. So we're going to win first and then we're just going to go do it, right? So I think I recovered. Yeah. So I think just connecting everything, I think that is huge. And I think leaders can really, there's also a bit of work that I found since I left Microsoft called outward mindset. I think Tyler Bryson might have turned me on to that. Just, if you can put yourself in another person's shoes, whether it's customers, your team members, and really think about their needs, objectives, and challenges first, it'll help you do your job better and more effectively. It'll also make you a much more powerful influencer. So there's a lot there.
Oh, so true. And you know what I got to say, large companies like Microsoft have to constantly be aware of that, because it's so easy to be insular and focus on the internal as opposed to keeping that, focus externally. And you got to be outside in. And yeah, there's always a risk, particularly for large clients or for large businesses, to not be outwardly focused. But yeah, you're right. It's so important.
We talked a lot about how I experienced you as a leader on your team, the outside in. What about managing up? Is there anything that you can share about, and it could be at really any level of your career, about skills or the importance? Was it important for how you communicated to your peers or the leaders above you?
Yeah, I think, again, lots of development areas, but I think I did this fairly well. I was always in sync with my manager, again, being clear on what success looked like for them, what was important to them, because, sometimes that it may not be what's important, to you out of the gates. And so being aligned on that is important. I always tried to be as low maintenance as I could. What I found, and I found this early on in my career, is that sometimes people just go to their manager right away as soon as they encounter a problem. Yet, 95% of the time, if you just think about what answer they're going to give you, you can just go and do it yourself. And, obviously that's not all the case all the time. And, in fact, that's how I'd use my one-on-ones is, the big gnarly problems is what I would bring to my manager to kind of hash through to get value from them. But then I always just assume full accountability, and so I didn't make excuses when things are going wrong. And so I think that's really important. But that said, you mentioned managing across. I could have done a better job at that. I think, where there's dependencies, I think I did a pretty good job because I generally a good team player. It was more, with leaders outside of my business that I didn't do. In hindsight, I could have been better at that. I think we could have built better connections, to get leverage from each other, and even just from a career standpoint, kind of got to know better, people in other organizations better. But in a large organization, reaching across the aisle and working with others, getting to know others, it's just so important. And I don't think I did as good a job as I probably could have at Microsoft.
What do you think was getting in the way of that at the time?
I didn't prioritize it. I kind of in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking, I should reach out to so-and-so and, just have a one-on-one and let them know what we're doing and see if there's an opportunity to collaborate. Again, where there's dependencies, I was always a good team player, but it was really where there was opportunities that weren't necessarily on the surface and where you can collaborate. And I just, you get busy, and I just, didn't prioritize it. And in hindsight, I probably should have better.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think just the outward mindset of, what's going on for you. I think I did that pretty well. And it actually saved me a few times, like with a colleague where something was going bad and I'm like, I need your help here. And you had those sort of relationships. So that worked out well for me. But I think that's a good learning. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'd love to spend a few minutes on your leadership development journey and how you think of that, because I think it's quite extraordinary to spend nearly your entire career at one company. And you didn't just do that and remain stagnant in one position. Stagnant's the wrong word. Some people just love their role and they continue to grow and learn in it. So I didn't mean it that way, but you just rapidly grew. I think you joined it at fairly early in career level at Microsoft, and you left, about as high as you could be as a CVP. How did you think about your leadership journey?
Yeah, well, I kind of separate two unique things. One is kind of around development and just getting better, and then the other is kind of how I plan my career, right? And so on the personal development side, I think it's super important to continue to grow, develop your skill sets, learn more experiences. And some people would take courses. I didn't get a lot out of courses that didn't do a lot for me. Even mentors, some people get a lot out of mentors. I found I was more kind of situational mentorship, if you will. Like I was dealing with one challenge, I go meet with somebody who I thought would be really good at help me with it. But generally, I felt it was a bit of an armchair quarterback kind of thing scenario. So I didn't do as well with that. I did take advantage of special projects, which, takes extra work and, you can carve out time to do it. But I think I developed a lot there. But where I think I developed the most was just observing other leaders in action. You've kind of talked a little bit about that today. And, still being, true to who I am at my core, but, adopting certain characteristics where I'd see it, work. And I think we talked about precision questioning. That was one that I wouldn't have had that skill set coming into Microsoft, but I think that developed over time. I would say another one was being more human at work. Definitely when I started at Microsoft, I was very guarded. I was like, hey, business Dave is, now here, not personal Dave. And what I found as a leader, people need to see the personal side. They need to see who you are. They even like to know what you're doing outside of work and everything else. And so it took me a while to let my guard down and realize, hey, I can open up and, be somewhat vulnerable and what have you. And I think that helped me develop as well. But then from a career standpoint, I would say, just in watching others and how I approached it, you first need to be aware of what motivates you, right? Because some people saw, hey, I want to be the CEO, I want to be a CVP, whatever, and focus on that. I was never like that. I was, which might sound a little tactical, but I was little job to job to get to where I got, and it was really around I wanted to challenge. I wanted to learn, and I definitely wanted to contribute. I rarely wanted to be in a side business. I kind of wanted to be at the core, and so with that focus, I think it really helped. And I never really had a job other than my last two CVP jobs, which were 4 years each. Prior to that, they're 2 to 3 years max, kind of thing. I also think some people you need to be aware of the path you want to go, right? Because some people, like a specific discipline. So, hey, I'm a marketer. I want to go up the marketing path. I'm, on the technical side, I want to go up the technical path. I kind of approach it differently, where I did lots of different experience. I did it, everything from Xbox to, enterprise. And I think it really allowed, and, sales, marketing, technical, it allowed me to, open up for general management leadership roles later on in career. And again, I kind of fell into it. I'm not sure I thought that through, but it sure played out. But I do think that's something people need to think about as they planning their careers is, hey, do I want to go up a certain vertical path or try lots of different things, which could open up opportunities. And last thing I'll share on this is, the three things, and I think there was a book I read at one point that it wasn't exactly these three things, but it kind of led me to develop this more disciplined thinking on how I manage my careers. The first is, deliver consistent performance and results in your current role. That's, job number one. If you're not doing that, yeah. Second is you have to live the right values, right? Particularly around, teamwork and just, someone that wants, you want to work with, kind of thing. And then more specifically, what I would do, and I was conscious about this, is, about 12 or 18 months into a role, I'd think about, hey, what are the next 2 to 3 roles that might be really interesting to move into? I wouldn't limit it to one because, you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, or didn't want to, get myself too thin and too many different roles. So it was about 2 to 3. I'd search out who the managers are and even the influencers on who might, decide on who's going to be in that job. I meet with them, get to know them, understand what's required. If there's gaps that I had on skills or experience, then I had time, to take on projects or do other things in order to, prepare for it. And then, when they were ready to hire, they thought of me. And I'm trying to think, the last job I actually went and applied to that was posted and applied to, I think was like, one of my first management jobs. After that, it was all tapped on the shoulder. And it was because I was disciplined and making the connections, you know, delivering in my role, living the right values. And in many ways, at a company like Microsoft, anyways, your career can really be looked after for you.
Amazing. A couple things come to mind as I listen to you. This on the job learning, I think a lot of people do think about development as just a training class, but you're just watching and observing, how does that leader make me feel? Was it good or bad? What did they do that was effective or not effective? And you're just putting stuff in your, toolbox. If you're earlier in career or even mid-career, you're always being proactive and intentional, even if you're not actively involved in the conversation, right? I think that is a phenomenal lesson to hear you say.
I also observe things not to do because
Not to do. I mean, probably even more of those, right? Like, ouch, I'll never, I really don't want to be like that. Um, my son Luca is literally in his second day today of his internship. And I was trying to tell him, I wish I could have said that exact way, which is, hey, absorb everything, really just, be active. And then the second thing I heard you say is, there's skill set and expertise in being broad, right? And being that connector, being that sort of operating model connector. And then just being intentional and proactive.
But on that one though, just I want to be clear. That was right for me. That's not right for
Yes.
everyone. Like it's
Yeah.
okay to be the best
Mhm.
marketer who wants to become the CMO of an organization, right? I mean that's but it's just being clear on that because if you're not and you take the wrong if you want the CMO job but you're going and doing all these other things, it may not be the right path for you. So it's just being deliberate on how you think about that.
That's great. And just this balance of, yes, after 12 or 18 months in a role, you're being intentional about exploring what might be out there and talking to people. At the same time, the reason why you're taking roles is because they challenge you, you can contribute. And so there's a little bit of, we're walking in a fog and we'll see once we get there. And I'm going to continue to be drawn to things that I can contribute to and learn something new. And the proactiveness of the exploration, less about managing to some version that you create on a paper 5 years ago, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You
Yeah.
summarized it well.
Okay. No, I'm continuing to learn from you, Dave. Continuing to learn from you. Well, this has been really terrific. I appreciate you so much. I would love to actually, before I go there, I am interested if there are any big things that pop out for you. So if I think of your career stages, individual contributor at Microsoft, and at some point you had your first manager role, and then you moved into sort of a second line leadership role, and then obviously a very broad leader as a CVP. As you think about those different career stages, are there any big areas of growth or development that come to mind for one or all of them that pop out for you? I'm famous for asking really big complex questions that are really like 8 questions in one. So feel free to answer that however you like.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I'd revert all the way back to my first manager job because I remember I joined Microsoft an individual contributor in my mid-20s, and about 2 years in, I wanted to become a manager, and and I got the manager job. I remember because I was a pretty good individual contributor, but I really struggled initially out of the gates in my first manager job, which you might laugh at, given everything we've been talking about today. But I really struggled, and it's because I thought that manager job was kind of the next step in my career. It was just kind of climbing the ladder, and as I said, I was want to learn, be challenged, contribute, all those sorts of things. Want to be at the table, but I realized, early on that how important it is to deeply care about your people and truly care about your people's success, and that is what being a manager is all about. And so I fortunately, it wasn't, I think I don't know how many months in I was, but I was thinking, why aren't they following me? Why aren't they, I'm the leader here. Why aren't, I didn't feel like they're kind of following me in a battle kind of thing, that I had to kind of prove myself to them or something. And it was because I wasn't caring about them. I wasn't asking the questions to learn, about their needs and wants and desires
Mhm.
and everything else. And so once I started doing that, and then I realized it was actually a lot of fun and it was good and I was motivated by it, then I became a much better manager. So I think it's kind of for that early or that individual contributors looking to become a manager, just do it for the right reasons and understand that, because you're not going to be a good manager if you don't do it for the right reasons.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Well, Dave, I have one final question for you. One sentence or one thought around if you could only give one piece of advice for about being a leader, what would that be?
Yeah, well, I would say, earlier I talked about, observing other leaders and modifying that. That to me is again modifying kind of who you are, but not changing who you are. So, because I do think you need to round out your skills and experience and development. But maintain integrity who you are. Don't try to be someone else. Because I've seen that before, and people see right through it. They quickly, you can understand if someone is trying to, fake it to make it kind of thing. And you have to be true. And part of that, as I mentioned earlier, is letting people know who you are as well, and exposing to a certain extent that as well. But at the end of the day, you got to be yourself. And if you can be yourself and you're a good person, people get drawn towards you, and they want to follow. And so that would be my one piece of advice.
Great advice. And you certainly exemplify that, Dave. So thank you for being my inaugural guest on this podcast. And just thank you for all the leadership you gave me in my career. It made all the difference. I literally would not be sitting here today without you. So thank you deeply.
No, Jamie, thank you. In fact, when I got the email from you asking me to participate, I talked to my wife, Sandy, and she's like, of course you got to do that. Jamie, she was amazing working with you. So yeah, and I would have done it regardless. Yeah, you're amazing to work with, and so great to continue to connect here.
Thanks, Dave. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, Jamie. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please join us every Tuesday as we continue to bring you insider access to executive leadership.